The stage was set, the cameras were rolling, and the audience settled in for what they expected to be just another heated debate on The View. For years, Whoopi Goldberg had been the undisputed voice, the moderator who led the conversation with a sharp tongue and unyielding confidence. Her reputation for effortlessly dismantling conservative arguments had become a staple of the show. But today was different. Today, it wasn't just any guest sitting across from her. Karoline Leavitt, a young, rising star in the political arena, was about to take the chair. Her calm demeanor masked the fire within, a fire that had been quietly building as she rose through the ranks of her party. The audience, always accustomed to seeing Whoopi in full control, wasn't prepared for what was coming next. Whoopi began with her usual approach. Quick-witted and sharp, she immediately pressed Karoline on her views, assuming the typical back and forth would unfold. But there was something in Karoline's eyes, a quiet determination, that sent a wave of tension across the studio. As Whoopi made her move, throwing her first challenge, Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice steady and measured, yet undeniably powerful. What followed was a clash of ideologies. But it wasn't the kind Whoopi had anticipated. For the first time in a long while, the unshakable Whoopi Goldberg found herself questioning her own assumptions. Karoline, with her calm yet undeniable conviction, didn't just respond, she disrupted. The studio, usually filled with the sounds of applause and laughter, fell into an eerie silence. The audience, once firmly behind Whoopi, now found themselves on the edge of their seats, grappling with a perspective they hadn't considered before. It wasn't just a debate. It was a moment that would change the dynamics of the show, and perhaps even the way America viewed political discourse. The narrative had shifted, and Whoopi Goldberg, for the first time, had lost control. As the tension lingered in the air, the world outside the studio was already buzzing. Clips of the exchange spread like wildfire. And the question on everyone's mind was clear. Had Whoopi Goldberg, the queen of political discourse, finally met her match in Karoline Leavitt? The silence in the studio was deafening. Whoopi, who had always been in command of every conversation, could feel the shift. Her usual sharp retorts felt hollow in this moment, her words hanging in the air like unfinished thoughts. Karoline Leavitt sat there, unwavering, her calmness a stark contrast to Whoopi's mounting unease. "Karoline," Whoopi said, trying to regain her composure, her voice slightly sharper now, "you keep talking about personal responsibility. But let's be honest, can we really expect people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps in a system that's stacked against them? In a country where inequality is baked into the very system you defend?" The studio lights seemed hotter now, as though the whole room was waiting for the next exchange. Whoopi's eyes narrowed, her confidence not as impenetrable as it once was. Karoline, on the other hand, sat back slightly, as if weighing the question carefully before responding, not out of hesitation, but because she knew the impact of what she was about to say. "I think the real question is this, Whoopi," Karoline replied, her voice steady but firm. "What do we do when the system is broken? When government programs designed to help people end up trapping them instead of empowering them? It's not about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It's about giving people the opportunity to make a real, lasting change in their lives. Not just handing them a safety net that keeps them in place." Whoopi's eyes flickered for a moment, her lips pressing into a tight line. She had expected Karoline to take the bait, to stumble under the weight of her challenges. But instead, Karoline's response was precise, calculated, and resonated with an uncomfortable truth. The audience, once so firmly on Whoopi's side, had shifted. A few whispered exchanges could be heard. The usual applause had been replaced with murmurs of contemplation. One of the co-hosts, normally known for jumping in to support Whoopi, looked toward the crowd with uncertainty. The scripted rhythm of the show had been completely broken. Whoopi had expected Karoline to be just another conservative talking head, someone to challenge, to critique, but this wasn't that. Karoline was dismantling the very foundation of Whoopi's arguments, not by fighting back with insults or anger, but by challenging the framework itself. "You're not answering the question." Whoopi pressed again, unwilling to let go of her grip on the conversation. Are you saying that we should just abandon social programs altogether? That government has no role to play in lifting people out of poverty? Karoline met Whoopi's gaze, unflinching. No, what I'm saying is that we need to rethink how we approach the issue. Social programs have their place, but they're not a long-term solution. The real change comes from empowering people, from creating jobs, from investing in communities, not just throwing money at problems and hoping they go away. The room was quiet now, the weight of Karoline's words settling over everyone. It was as if the studio had turned into a battleground for ideas. And Whoopi, despite her experience, was struggling to maintain her ground. But Karoline wasn't done. She leaned forward, her voice steady as she addressed Whoopi directly. You talk about the importance of government. But have you ever stopped to ask why people feel so abandoned by it? Why people who have spent their whole lives relying on government programs still can't get ahead? It's not a lack of effort on their part, it's the system itself that's broken. And we've got to stop pretending that the same solutions will work when we keep recycling the same ideas. The studio was quieter now, the tension palpable. The murmurs that had started earlier grew louder as the audience seemed to process what Karoline was saying. Even Whoopi's usual supporters, the ones who had always cheered her on, looked unsure. The debate was no longer just about policy, it was about a deeper, more fundamental question. How had the conversation around poverty, opportunity, and government evolved to a point where even those who wanted to help seemed unsure of how to do it? Whoopi opened her mouth to respond but stopped. For the first time in a long time, she found herself hesitating. She had always been able to redirect a conversation, to manipulate the flow of words, to make sure that she came out on top. But now, the power dynamic had shifted. And Whoopi Goldberg, the woman who had so often been in control, was starting to realize just how powerful Karoline Leavitt had become in this moment. She turned toward the audience, trying to regain some semblance of control. But the damage was done. The energy in the room had changed. People were no longer listening with certainty. They were questioning everything they thought they knew. They were beginning to hear a perspective they had never fully considered before. You're right, Karoline, Whoopi said finally, her voice softer than it had been all show. There are problems with the system. But there are also people working within it to fix those problems. We can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. The government has done things that have helped millions. And I won't ignore that. Karoline's smile was small, but it was enough to shift the mood entirely. I'm not saying we throw anything out, Whoopi. I'm just saying that we need to get out of the way of people who are ready to take responsibility for their own futures. Government can only do so much. But ultimately, it's the people who will change their own lives. And with that, the debate ended. But the fallout, the ripple effect of this conversation, was just beginning. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, the studio exploded into chaos, some cheering for Karoline, others muttering in disbelief at what had just unfolded. Clips of the exchange spread like wildfire across social media. People who had watched the show for years now found themselves grappling with a question they had never asked before. Had Whoopi Goldberg lost control? Or had she, in that brief moment of hesitation, given space to a new way of thinking? What was certain was that the view would never be the same again. The power dynamics had shifted. And for the first time, it wasn't Whoopi's voice that dominated the narrative, it was Karoline's. The question on everyone's lips wasn't just about who won the debate, it was about how far the conversation would go. And whether it would lead to something even bigger. The aftermath of the debate was a whirlwind. Outside the studio, the media storm began almost instantly. Clips of the heated exchange between Whoopi Goldberg and Karoline Leavitt flooded social media platforms, with the most viral moments being shared and dissected by millions of viewers. Headlines like Whoopi Goldberg stunned by Karoline Leavitt on live TV and The View's unthinkable shift. Whoopi loses ground to Karoline Leavitt popped up across every major news outlet. In the days that followed, the narrative continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Whoopi, usually so quick to address controversies, found herself in a rare moment of reflection. She had always prided herself on her ability to command a conversation, to steer it where she wanted it to go. But Karoline had done something few had ever managed to do. She had made Whoopi question her own assumptions. Not just about policy, but about the nature of the debates themselves. In the green room at The View, the tension was palpable. Whoopi, who had always been the unshakable anchor of the show, was now walking through the halls with a sense of unease. Her co-hosts, who had always been her loyal allies, were quieter than usual, sensing the weight of what had just happened. Even Joy Behar, Whoopi's longtime partner in political banter, seemed less eager to jump into the fray. They all knew that something had changed, not just in the studio, but in the public perception of the show. Whoopi, however, wasn't one to back down easily. She was a seasoned television personality, someone who had faced her share of tough situations. But this time, there was something different in the air. She sat at her desk, scrolling through the comments online, feeling a mix of frustration and intrigue. The comments were split. Many of her supporters were quick to defend her, insisting that Karoline's arguments were shallow and unconvincing. Yet, there was a growing number of voices, particularly from independent voters and moderate Democrats, who seemed to agree with Karoline's message. One particular comment caught Whoopi's eye. Maybe it's time to start listening. Instead of just talking. Whoopi's lost touch with what's really happening out there. The words stung. Whoopi had always prided herself on being in tune with her audience, on championing the voices of the unheard. But this comment, along with countless others, made her realize that there was a shift happening, one that she couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Karoline was not resting on her laurels. The moment she walked off the stage, she was already preparing for the next phase of her campaign. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from supporters, both from her own party and from independents who had seen something in her that resonated. The interview had done more than just give her a platform. It had solidified her reputation as someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, even on the most dominant progressive platform in the country. Within hours, Karoline was appearing on conservative talk shows, proudly discussing her victory on The View, while also emphasizing her belief in restoring dignity and independence to American families. She didn't just talk about policies, she spoke directly to the people who felt forgotten by Washington. The working class, the ones struggling in the shadows of economic decline, were now hearing someone who wasn't trying to give them a handout but to give them the tools to build their future. As Karoline's voice grew louder, Whoopi found herself grappling with the implications of the debate. The audience that had once been firmly in her corner was now divided. Some praised her for her long-standing advocacy for social justice, while others questioned if her unwavering stance on progressive policies had made her blind to the real challenges facing the American people. Whoopi had always been a fighter. But this was different. This wasn't just another political fight, it was a fight for control over the narrative itself. Back on The View, Whoopi knew she had to regain her footing. The next episode was rapidly approaching, and with it, the challenge of facing an audience that was no longer sure where they stood. Whoopi had always been able to reclaim control of the conversation before. But this time, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably shifted. For the first time, the audience wasn't just watching a debate, they were questioning everything they had been told. The day of the next episode arrived. Whoopi took her seat at the table, her usual calm confidence replaced by a rare sense of vulnerability. The producers warned her that the conversation might be unpredictable, given the public response to her previous encounter with Karoline. Her co-hosts were eager to jump in, ready to defend Whoopi's honor. But even they seemed to sense that this episode would not go as planned. As the camera lights brightened and the familiar theme music began, Whoopi's eyes scanned the studio. The audience, who had once been a sea of unwavering support, now seemed divided. The atmosphere was charged with an undercurrent of uncertainty. Whoopi, the indomitable force, was about to face the consequences of losing control, not just of the debate, but of the very audience she had cultivated over the years. The show began with the usual pleasantries, but Whoopi couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. She knew this wouldn't be a typical episode. As the conversation opened, the first question was posed, one she had crafted herself, designed to steer the conversation back in her favor. But just as she expected to set the tone, one of her co-hosts, Ana Navarro, interrupted her with a question that cut deeper than she anticipated. "Whoopi, we need to talk about what happened last time," Anna said, her voice measured. "The audience is clearly torn. And honestly, some of us are wondering if there's more we need to listen to. Maybe more than we've been willing to admit." Whoopi's heart skipped a beat. The table had turned, and now she was the one being questioned. She felt the room shift as the familiar rhythm of the show was disrupted. The controlled narrative was slipping away. The question wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt anymore. It was about Whoopi herself and whether she was still the voice of reason for a changing world. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about a reckoning. A moment where Whoopi Goldberg would have to confront whether her place on The View was still secure. Or if a new narrative had begun to take root. One that she couldn't control. The tension in the room grew heavier. Whoopi Goldberg, the veteran host who had always steered the ship with confidence and authority, now found herself in a vulnerable position. The usual cheers, the applause, the predictability of the show, it was all gone. In its place was an uncomfortable silence. A collective unease that hung in the air. As the camera focused on her, Whoopi's thoughts raced. She had always prided herself on being the unshakable voice of reason. The one who kept the conversation on track. But the shift she had felt after her exchange with Karoline Leavitt was undeniable. Her usual tricks, her sharp retorts, had lost their bite. The audience wasn't responding in the way they once did. Karoline's words had hit harder than she expected. And for the first time, Whoopi realized that she might not have all the answers. Ana Navarro's question echoed in her mind. Maybe there's more we need to listen to. Maybe more than we've been willing to admit. For a long moment, Whoopi stayed silent, the weight of Anna's words sinking in. The studio lights felt suddenly dimmer. The once familiar atmosphere now feeling foreign. She had been so sure of herself. So accustomed to having the last word. But this time, there were no quick comebacks. No easy retorts. There was only a quiet, uncomfortable truth that she had been avoiding. I don't have all the answers," Whoopi said quietly, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I've spent my career standing firm in my beliefs. But Karoline made me think about something. Maybe we've been so focused on what we believe is the right solution that we've lost sight of what's actually working for people who are struggling." The room fell into an eerie silence. Whoopi's co-hosts, usually quick to respond, sat back, surprised by the unexpected humility in her voice. The audience, too, seemed unsure how to react. The usual applause never came. Instead, there was a murmur, a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted, not just in the show, but in Whoopi herself. "And maybe," Whoopi continued, her voice gaining strength, "it's time we truly listen to those who feel left behind. Not just the voices we're comfortable with, but those who think differently. We might not agree with them, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't hear them. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't find common ground." The words hung in the air. And for a moment, it seemed as if Whoopi was allowing herself to step out of the spotlight. To share the stage with a more diverse array of voices. Her usual confidence was there. But it was tempered with a newfound understanding. A recognition that no single narrative, no single person, could hold all the answers. Ana Navarro, ever the voice of reason, smiled slightly. "It's not about winning the argument, Whoopi. It's about learning something new. And I think we're all learning today." The conversation continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The debates weren't as polarized. The words less cutting. There was still tension, of course. But it was a tension rooted in a willingness to understand. Not just to dominate. The usual back and forth had been replaced by a genuine dialogue. Something that had been lacking on The View for years. As the show drew to a close, Whoopi looked out at the audience, feeling an unfamiliar but comforting sense of peace. She had always been a fighter, and today had proven that even the toughest fighters could learn and evolve. The debate had not ended with a clear winner, but it had opened the door for a new kind of conversation. One where all voices, even the ones that challenged her most, were heard. The credits rolled, and as Whoopi stood up to leave, she paused for a moment, glancing at the empty chair across from her. Karoline Leavitt had left the studio hours earlier, but the mark she had left on The View was still there. The conversation had shifted, the narrative had changed, And Whoopi Goldberg was no longer just the voice of reason. She was now part of the conversation, ready to listen and, for the first time in years, open herself up to something new. As the lights dimmed and the studio emptied, the world outside continued to buzz. The debate wasn't over. It had only just begun. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope it gave you something to think about and sparked a meaningful conversation. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking discussions, debates, and updates. Your support means the world to us. And by subscribing, you won't miss out on any of our upcoming content. Thanks again for being part of the conversation. See you in the next video.